The story opened with a jolt. In the center of the Riverside Atlantic Bank lobby, under the cold white lights branch, manager Brian Keller planted himself like a human barricade and shouted straight into the face of Elena Brooks, a black woman in a simple hoodie. "People like you are not withdrawing $75,000 here." His voice cracked through the granite walls, bouncing sharply into the ears of waiting customers, drawing a few curious, uneasy glances. Elena, 38 years old, stood there with a strangely calm expression, as if she had grown used to being judged by the fabric on her back, yet her chest still tightened. That familiar ache, that instant and baseless judgment, struck her again like a sudden shower of hail. But Eleanor didn't back down. She didn't bow her head. She simply breathed in lightly, as if steadying the slow, burning fire in her chest. The polished glass counter behind Brian reflected his posture. Shoulders tensed, eyes gleaming with the small, fragile authority he believed was enough to crush anyone who did not look like the bank's idea of a proper customer. Brian snatched the withdrawal slip from Eleanor's hand, holding it up like a piece of incriminating evidence. $75,000, you think this is some kind of check-cashing place? He scoffed, his voice thick with contempt. Where did you get this account information, or did you steal it? A flash of shock crossed Elena's face. She said nothing, a difficult but deliberate choice, because any word spoken in moments like this only fed the illusion that she was defending herself against a crime she never committed. Customers began whispering. A middle-aged woman murmured, "What is going on?" An elderly man withdrew $5,000 without a single question. A young office worker smiled and walked away with $2,000 in cash. Yet Eleanor, who was requesting her own money, was being treated like a criminal on the brink of robbing the bank. Across the room, Ethan Miles, 31, paused midway through pulling out his phone. His eyes widened as Brian continued, "Call security." Someone is trying to scam the bank. In that instant, Ethan knew this was not a misunderstanding. This was a moment that needed to be witnessed by as many people as possible. He tapped to start a live stream. Everyone this bank is treating this woman like a criminal for trying to withdraw her own money. More eyes turned toward Elena, the woman who stood impossibly composed, even as her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from rage at history repeating itself in a way that felt far too familiar. Rage that a basic right, the right to equal service, could be stripped away in a matter of seconds. Brian stepped closer, lowering his voice, just enough for the entire lobby to still hear. "You think people normally walk around with $75,000 to withdraw? Must be dirty money." Elena's gaze darkened her chest, constricting, but when she spoke, her voice was controlled and cool. "I want to speak to your superior." Brian laughed loudly, tilting his head back with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. "I decide who you speak to, and right now you can speak to security." Jenna Porter, the young teller, shot Eleanor an apologetic look, but still followed orders. Fear kept her silent. Eleanor reached into her bag, her hands steady, every movement precise. She dialed a familiar number. "Patricia, it is me. There is a situation at Riverside Atlantic. Call me back in 15 minutes. The bank's name slipped from her mouth, and Brian hesitated for a split second, but quickly regained his smug expression. Elena's thoughts spun silently. I cannot lose my temper. I cannot make a single wrong move. One wrong step and they will use it against me. Then she repeated the phrase that had rescued her many times. Power does not come from shouting. Power comes from the truth. Across the room, Ethan watched her through the phone screen. He saw the pain behind her calm face. He saw the way she tightened her grip on the black leather portfolio, grounding herself so she would not break. He saw her eyes, not the eyes of someone guilty, but the eyes of someone who had endured a lifetime of this and was being pushed to her limit. The live stream climbed 2356, 109 viewers. Comments poured in. What is happening? This is blatant discrimination. So if you have $75,000, you must dress fancy. What is wrong with them? Brian snapped at Ethan. Turn that off. Ethan did not move. I am documenting your behavior. There is no rule against recording. Brian's anger flared, but he could not eject Ethan, not in a lobby full of customers, not when he was trying to build a false narrative against Elena. The air grew heavier, as if something was about to snap. Elena felt every gaze on her suspicion, pity, outrage, curiosity. Yet she stayed rooted, unshaken like a tree that had weathered every storm and refused to fall. The back door swung open. Brian barked, "Where is security? Get her out." Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them, deep, calm, sharp as a blade. "I am not leaving," she said, "until the bank processes my transaction." It was not a plea. It was a declaration. And no one, not even Eleanor herself, knew that in 14 minutes, the entire bank, Brian's career, Linda's career, and the reputation of all 312 branches would collapse under the quiet force she carried. Elena stood there unaware that she was the storm they had summoned, and that storm had only just begun. The air inside the Riverside Atlantic Bank lobby thickened, as if an invisible hand were squeezing every breath out of the room. Elena Brooks stood at the eye of the storm, feeling every gaze slicing into her like cold blades. She knew that feeling too well. This was not suspicion. This was accusation, condemnation, a verdict delivered without evidence. "You are causing a disturbance," Brian Keller said, his voice rising as he prepared for yet another performance of authority. "Normal people do not withdraw $75,000 unless there is a problem." Each word dropped like a boulder, making nearby customers step back, as if afraid Elena carried something dangerous. Elena did not flinch or tremble. She simply looked straight at Brian, a calm yet razor-sharp stare that made him visibly uncomfortable. The glass door behind her reflected the image of a woman holding her ground in the middle of a storm, even though inside her chest felt like it was cracking apart. She was tired, too familiar with this scene, too familiar to still be shocked, but never familiar enough for it to feel normal. A flicker of her mother's voice flashed through her mind. "You must be stronger than anyone, because the world will always demand that you prove you deserve your place." Elena hated that lesson, yet today it felt painfully true. The heavy footsteps of security echoed from behind, each step steady and forceful, like the drumbeat of a hunt beginning. Samuel Briggs, head of security, appeared like a concrete wall in motion, his eyes trained to look for trouble, and already deciding he had found it. "What is the issue?" Samuel asked, eyes fixed on Eleanor. "This individual is attempting to withdraw funds from an account that is not hers," Brian answered, savoring the power boost he had just gained. "We suspect serious fraud." The word fraud rippled through the lobby like a shockwave. An elderly woman gasped. A businessman stepped aside, clutching his briefcase. Others raised their phones, not to help Elena, but to record as if she were some spectacle. That atmosphere where people quietly wait to watch you fall was something Elena had faced her entire life. This time she knew they would pay for it. "Your name, Samuel," demanded hand hovering near his radio. "Elena Brooks," she replied, her voice steady and clear. Brian smirked. A fake name will not help you. In the corner, Ethan Miles clenched his jaw, gripping his phone tighter. His live stream had passed 200 viewers and was climbing like a rising tide. "Do you see this?" Ethan said, voice trembling with anger. "They are not even reviewing her documents. They are judging her by her skin." Samuel stepped closer, his shadow falling over Elena like a dark cloud. "I need you to step away from the transaction counter. If you refuse, we will have to call the police." A cold current ran down Elena's spine, not because she feared being arrested, but because of the arrogance and ignorance standing in front of her. They had no idea who they were speaking to. They thought she was powerless. They thought they had the right to humiliate her. They thought they alone controlled how this morning would end. They were wrong. "I am not going anywhere," Elena said, her voice low but commanding. "I have the right to access my own account." Brian burst into laughter. "You say that like you own this bank." Fate clearly had a twisted sense of humor. Elena tilted her head slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. "If I want to speak to the regional director, who do I talk to?" she asked. Brian turned to Jenna. "No one here is obligated to serve customers like her." Jenna blinked, visibly shaken. She looked like she wanted to speak, but fear swallowed her words. She offered Eleanor an apologetic look. Yet what good was apology when accompanied by silence? The live stream neared 400 viewers. Comments flooded in. Why are they not checking her ID? This is blatant discrimination. Does anyone have the Riverside Atlantic hotline? We cannot just watch this. But inside the lobby, no one spoke up. Not a single soul. A businessman in an expensive suit who had withdrawn $5,000 in less than 30 seconds looked at Elena, once then hurried away as if fleeing danger. A young woman with a phone hesitated for half a second before turning her back. An elderly lady stared at Elena with sympathy, yet remained frozen in place. Silence. A cowardly silence, toxic and far more cruel than any insult. Elena felt her heart tighten again. She gave a small, weary yet proud smile, then bent down to pick up her portfolio. "I want the names of everyone involved for my report," she said, her voice neither shaking nor breaking. It carried only truth, sharp and cold. Brian scoffed loudly. "Report to who?" Your free attorney Ethan nearly shouted into his live stream. "They have no idea what they are getting themselves into." Oh my God. Samuel gripped his radio harder. "I'm ordering you to exit the bank immediately." Elena calmly opened her portfolio. The soft rustle of paper sounded like the warning breath before a storm. When the logo of Brooks Financial Group flashed for an instant, Linda Harrington, the regional manager who had just stepped out of the back office, saw it. Her eyes stuttered in a brief, startled pause. Small, barely noticeable, but enough for Elena to catch it. Elena closed the portfolio. "I will wait a few more minutes," she said, "because this matter is more serious than you realize." Brian crossed his arms, smug. "We are calling the police. You brought this on yourself." No one knew that in that very moment, beneath those contemptuous looks, the cowardly silence, and the rapidly growing live stream, a massive revelation was standing at the door, waiting to detonate. And that explosion would drown the entire branch. And Brian's career shake the entire Riverside Atlantic system, all because of the woman they dared to underestimate. Elena Brooks lifted her gaze toward Brian, Samuel and Linda, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath. They did not know they were standing at the edge of a cliff. She did not know. But fate knew all too well. The game they thought they controlled had never belonged to them. And in only a few more minutes, they would learn that lesson in a way they would never forget. The air inside the Riverside Atlantic Bank lobby grew so dense it felt like anyone could reach out and touch the tension vibrating through it like a stretched steel wire. Linda Harrington, the 51-year-old regional manager, stepped out from the back office with a clipboard in hand and the confident expression of someone who believed she was the final authority in the room. She glanced at Elena Brooks with the kind of eyes that had spent a lifetime judging customers in seconds, and in that instant, Linda decided Elena was a problem. No verification needed, no examination required. One look at her skin tone, her simple clothes, her unnervingly calm posture, and Linda was convinced the entire lobby was witnessing a fraud attempt. "What is happening here?" Linda demanded, her voice sharp high and saturated with power. Brian Keller straightened his shoulders instantly, his face lighting up as though the savior had arrived. "This customer is trying to withdraw a large sum of money without proving any legitimate source," Brian said, emphasizing the words "this customer," as though Elena did not deserve to be addressed by name. Linda nodded, still not bothering to look at any of Elena's documents. "I understand. This may be a case of money laundering." The words "money laundering" detonated softly across the lobby. A couple of customers flinched. A man stepped back, and an elderly woman clutched her chest. Elena remained still like a statue carved out of patience, and fury pressed tight together. But her eyes shifted slightly, not because of the accusation, but because of the exhausting familiarity of the scene. People with small power and loud voices always believed they could trample others without ever facing consequences. "I have identification and my bank card," Elena said calmly. "That is enough to process my transaction." Linda pressed her lips together, as if advising a child. "For large withdrawals, you must provide proof of income, proof of funds, pay stubs, tax documentation." Why, Elena asked, soft but sharp enough to cut. The customer who withdrew $5,000 earlier was not asked for any of that. That question struck like a slap, turning every head in the lobby. Linda tried to dodge it. "Each case is different. We assess based on risk indicators." Elena let out a faint laugh, but that small sound pierced Brian's and Linda's pride like a needle. "Risk," she repeated. "And what exactly is the risk indicator?" No one answered. Brian looked at Linda. Linda looked at Samuel, and Samuel stared at his radio, as if hoping it would magically supply a rescue line. In the corner, Ethan Miles's live stream surged to 700 viewers. Comments rushed in like a waterfall. "This is terrifying. They are being so blatant. Risk indicator equals skin color, call the press." Still not a single voice in the lobby spoke up for Eleanor. She looked around at the witnesses. They did not look at her like a victim. They looked at her like the cause of an inconvenience, the interruption of their peaceful morning. A young woman stared at Elena with pity, but when Elena met her eyes, she immediately turned away. A tight ache formed in Elena's chest, an ancient, familiar sorrow that still hurt enough to steal breath. Yet deep beneath it, that sorrow was already hardening into something sharper, stronger, more enduring. Linda tapped her pen against the clipboard. "I am ordering you to leave the bank immediately and schedule an appointment with the Fraud Prevention Department. They will verify your identity and your funds within 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Ethan nearly shouted in the live stream. "Are you kidding me? She is trying to withdraw her own money." But Brian and Linda were not listening. They were looking only at Elena, waiting for her to accept it, waiting for her to bow her head, waiting for her to back down the way thousands had done before when confronted by small authority disguised as power. But Elena did not retreat. She slowly reached into her portfolio, and in that moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Her hand brushed past stacks of leather-bound documents, stopping at the corner of a file embossed with gold ink the logo of Brooks Financial Group. She did not remove it. She did not need to. A single flash of gold reflection was enough to make Linda blink. A tiny blink, quick and subtle, but Eleanor caught it. She knew Linda had sensed something that did not match her assumptions, but Linda was someone who had lived her whole life trapped inside the cage of false confidence and imagined authority. So she did what people like her always do. She ignored the warning. "You are wasting our time," Linda snapped. "I will have security escort you out if you keep arguing." Elena stared at Linda for a long moment. A very long moment. As if measuring how many seconds of silence it would take for someone to recognize their own mistake. But Linda recognized nothing. "What is your name?" Elena asked. Linda froze for half a second in surprise before answering in a steely tone. "Linda Harrington, Regional Manager." "Why?" Elena nodded. "Thank you." Brian folded his arms, basking in imagined victory. "What are you writing our names for, planning to sue us? You do not even know the law." Elena did not respond. She simply lifted her phone, opened the camera, and photographed each of their name badges. Brian's patience cracked. Enough, call the police. Samuel raised his hand to his radio. At that exact moment, another customer walked into the lobby, an older man in a sharp grey suit. He stopped immediately at the sight before him. He looked at Elena, then at Brian, then at Linda, confusion clouding his face. He looked like he wanted to speak. But then he did not. The power of belonging keeps people silent. But that silence only poured fuel onto the slow, burning fire inside Eleanor. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said, "If you want to call the police, go ahead. I will wait. But before they arrive, I need you to understand one thing." Every gaze in the lobby snapped toward her. Brian's eyes gleamed with triumph. Linda tightened her grip on the clipboard. Samuel held the radio like a trigger. "You are making a mistake far larger than any of you can imagine." The lobby went still. Even Ethan fell silent behind his camera. They did not know in what way Eleanor meant it. They assumed she was bluffing to escape. But fate knew the truth. They were minutes away from losing all the power they thought they held, and the small world they built on arrogance and bias was about to shatter like tempered glass struck at its weakest point. Elena looked straight at them at every self-satisfied face. "I am giving you one last chance," she said, her voice steady as forged steel. "Process my transaction." No one moved. No one spoke. Brian laughed first. "No, and that is the final decision." Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then opened them. And in that look was something none of them recognized, the signal of collapse. Because this moment, the moment they chose to deny the woman standing before them, was the moment they signed the sentence for their own downfall. And the game they believed they controlled would no longer belong to them. Samuel Briggs lifted his hand toward his radio, ready to call the police. And the instant the first sharp beep echoed through the Riverside Atlantic Bank lobby, the entire room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that warned a storm had just opened its eyes and fixed them on its prey. Brian Keller broke into a victorious smile, the smile of a man convinced he had cornered his opponent, and that in only a few minutes the woman standing before him would be escorted out of the bank in handcuffs. Linda Harrington folded her arms and stepped forward, as if preparing to end the situation with the authority she believed she possessed. Meanwhile, Elena Brooks remained perfectly still, showing no sign of fear, as if she had expected this exact moment, long before it happened. And what unsettled both Brian and Linda the most was that eerie calm, the kind of calm that did not belong to someone afraid, but to someone waiting for others to place the noose around their own neck. Security team. This is Branch Floor requesting immediate support, Samuel began. But before he could finish, Elena spoke, her voice soft, but echoing so clearly, it sliced through the room. Before you call the police, I would like to speak with the branch director or someone higher. Brian burst into laughter so hard his eyes squinted. You think you have that right? You think you matter enough for anyone higher up to come out and talk to you? Elena did not answer. She simply reached into her portfolio, pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and placed it against her ear. Patricia, connect me with Thomas Whitaker, she said calmly, her tone unnervingly precise. Yes. The Chief Executive Officer of Riverside Atlantic. Samuel's hand froze mid-air. Linda's eyes narrowed. Brian laughed even louder, dripping with mockery. Pretending will not save you. We are not here to play along with your fantasies. Elena still did not look at him. She stepped aside slightly, continuing the call with a controlled steadiness that made it seem as though she were placing an internal logistics request rather than standing seconds away from being detained. Yes, I can wait. Put me through as soon as he is available. Ethan Miles swallowed hard as the live stream climbed past. 1,200 viewers. Comments flooded in. Who is she? She is too calm for this. This is getting good. Plot twist incoming. She is calling the CEO. No way. If the call is real, this is about to blow up. But inside the lobby, no one took her seriously. Brian leaned over, speaking loudly enough for the whole room. Acting tough will not help you. Even if you knew someone at headquarters, nobody is saving you today. Elena ended the call and looked directly at Brian, her eyes neither angry nor challenging, just knowing. I already told you, she said, you are making a mistake far bigger than you think. Linda crossed her arms again, trying to maintain her composure. Do you have anything else to say before we proceed with protocol? Yes, Elena replied. I want your names and employee numbers for documentation. Brian scoffed. More reporting. Who are you reporting to the premium customers fantasy department? Elena said nothing. She simply opened the camera app and began photographing the name tags one by one. Brian stepped back half a step, suddenly, uneasy. Linda shifted to the right. Samuel frowned with irritation. Jenna Porter. The young teller was the only one who could not avoid it, and when Eleanor raised the phone toward her, Jenna whispered, I am sorry. Eleanor gave a small nod, her eyes still firm. It is all right. You are not the one making decisions. Brian snapped. Enough. No more pictures. But Eleanor had already finished. The flash reflected off the metal nameplates like a final spark before a heavy door slams shut. The back door opened again. A young employee walked in, carrying a stack of folders, clearly having heard fragments of the commotion. He glanced at Elena, then at Brian, then at Linda, with a confused expression. What is going on? He asked Jenna. Jenna began to whisper an answer, but Brian cut her off. None of your business. Get back to work. But as Elena set her portfolio on the counter, the golden embossed logo glinted against the stone surface, Brooks Financial Group. The young employee's eyes snapped to it, then to Elena, then to Linda. A flicker of realization crossed his face. Wait, he muttered. Brooks Bryan did not hear him, or did not care. He stepped closer, confident, like someone ready to press the victory button. "Are you leaving on your own, or do we have to be more forceful?" At that exact moment, Elena's phone vibrated. A notification appeared. She opened it in full view of everyone. On the screen, a message read, "Thomas Whitaker will return your call within 2 minutes." Elena held the phone up so Bryan could read it clearly. "Who is that?" Bryan demanded, trying to sound firm, but his voice no longer steady. "The Chief Executive Officer of Riverside Atlantic Bank," Elena replied. A chill swept through the lobby. A customer took a sharp breath. Ethan whispered into the live stream, "Oh my God." Linda clutched her blouse, her eyes flickering with panic, before she forced her expression back into managerial control. "All fake," she barked. "All of it." "You are not fooling me." "Really?" Elena asked softly. "Then why are you shaking?" Linda froze. And then a sound rang through the lobby, small but final, like a nail being driven into a coffin. Elena's phone rang, and the name on the screen was clear as daylight. "Thomas Whitaker, Chief Executive Officer, Riverside Atlantic," Ethan shouted into the live stream, sending the viewer count exploding. She actually got the call. Bryan's face drained of color. Linda went rigid. Samuel slowly lowered his hand from the radio. Jenna stood with her mouth open. Elena pressed the answer button, lifted the phone to her ear, and spoke with a calmness that sliced through the room. "Hello, Mr. Whitaker. I am here." And in that moment, the false power inside the bank cracked. Just a hairline fracture. But it would widen, it would spread, and it would crush the entire structure of arrogance, bias, and quiet discrimination that Bryan, Linda, and Samuel believed would always protect them. Elena taking that call was the first swing of the hammer. They did not know it yet. But Elena knew, and their downfall had only just begun. Elena lifted the phone to her ear, and the very moment Thomas Whitaker's voice came through, not only Bryan Keller, Linda Harrington, and Samuel Briggs, but the entire Riverside Atlantic Bank lobby seemed to freeze under the weight of an invisible shock. Thomas's voice was low, steady, authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to leading meetings with hundreds of people. "Elna, what is happening at the Midtown branch? Patricia just notified me. You requested an urgent connection." Elna remained upright, her gaze never leaving the 3 people who had treated her with contempt from the moment she walked in. "Yes," she replied, her voice unwavering, each word placed with surgical precision in the air. "I'm experiencing a serious issue with withdrawing my funds here." On the other end, Thomas paused, then asked carefully, "Are they giving you trouble?" A dangerous, razor-thin smile curved on Eleanor's lips. "If it were only trouble, I would not have called you. They are accusing me of fraud, accusing me of money laundering and threatening to call the police." A sharp exhale burst from Thomas, not out of surprise, but out of anger. Who Elena spoke without lowering her voice even a fraction. Bryan Keller, the branch manager. Linda Harrington, the regional manager, and head of security, Samuel Briggs. Bryan went pale instantly, as if someone had drained the blood from his face. Linda's body stiffened like stone, her eyes widening in disbelief at what she was hearing. Samuel slowly lowered his hand from the radio, staring at Elena, as though she had just opened a door no one in the bank ever wanted to face. Elena Thomas said slowly, "Would you like me to come there right now?" The bank lobby seemed to hold its breath. No whispering customers, no shuffling feet, no rustling papers. Just a thick, suffocating silence, the kind that signals a truth about to be exposed with painful clarity. Elena rested her hand on her portfolio, tracing the leather edge like a deliberate ritual. I think you should review my report when I send it. And you may need to prepare an emergency meeting room. Ethan Miles nearly choked behind his phone. His live stream exploded to 2,300 viewers in 10 seconds. Comments flooded like a storm. Who is she calling the CEO like it's nothing? Those employees are done. Plot twist of the year. Elena about to flip the entire bank. Upside down. Thomas's voice tightened with anger. Elena, I need to know, have you told them who you are? Elena looked directly into Brian's eyes. No blink, no tremor. And answered, not yet. Linda took half a step back. Brian swallowed hard. Samuel's eyes darted toward the exit like he was searching for escape. Good, Thomas said. You do not need to do anything else. I will be there myself within 5 minutes. Elena showed no surprise. We will talk further when you arrive. For now, I am still waiting for them to process my transaction. Understood, Thomas replied, his voice lowering. And I apologize that my staff put you through this. Elena ended the call with one clean line. It is all right. But they will have to explain. She hung up, set her phone on the counter, and looked at each person before her. None of them dared meet her gaze. Brian opened his mouth, scrambling for a defense, but his thoughts collided in panic, producing nothing but fragments of fear. At last he stuttered out, You actually know the CEO, Elena tilted her head slightly. Perhaps you should let him answer that. Linda tried to cling to whatever authority she had left. Regardless of who you know, banking procedures cannot be bypassed. We have a responsibility. Elena gently lifted one finger to her lips, signaling Linda to stop talking, a gesture so soft it bordered on rude, yet in that moment carried the weight of a command. Linda fell silent instantly. Samuel stared at Elena, not with the posture of someone in power, but with the eyes of a guard who suddenly realized he was standing on the wrong side of the battlefield. Who are you? He asked, his voice cracking. Elena raised her chin and met his gaze. A customer trying to withdraw money. The simplest truth, and somehow the hardest thing for this entire bank to understand. Ethan stepped closer, live stream capturing every shifting expression. You all see this, he said quietly but clearly. This is the face of power, strong when facing the weak, and weak when facing the strong. Brian's hands trembled as he turned to Linda. Should we pause the transaction until Mr. Whitaker arrives? We should follow protocol. Linda answered, but the arrogance was gone, her voice breaking between breaths. But Brian stammered, if she actually has a connection to upper leadership, then Linda bit her lower lip. Impossible. She's just... What do you mean, Elena? Cut in her tone, sharp enough to slice. Linda froze. I was referring to the policy, no. Elena stepped closer. What were you about to say when you said, just? Linda became motionless, caught at the intersection of truth and self-preservation. Brian looked to Linda for guidance, but she no longer had any control, and in that brief silence, their downfall revealed itself clearly. Minutes ago they were shouting, belittling, accusing and pushing with all the arrogance of unchallenged authority. Now, piece by piece, they were crumbling before the very woman they once believed they could crush without consequence. Elena placed 2 fingers lightly on the counter, tilting her head like a professor, waiting for a student to admit their mistake. I will give you one more chance, she said, her voice sharp and polished like a blade. Are you going to process my transaction? Brian looked at Linda. Linda looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at the floor. No one answered. Elena exhaled a long, cold, tired breath of finality. Very well, she said. Mr. Whittaker will handle the rest." At that exact moment, the front glass doors of the bank swung open. A rush of cold air swept in, and the man no one at Riverside Atlantic ever expected to see walk into this branch at midday stepped inside. In a deep navy suit, a silver tie, and a face tightened with controlled fury, CEO Thomas Whittaker of Riverside Atlantic Bank had arrived. Elena stood tall. Brian froze. Linda collapsed into a chair. Samuel stepped back half a pace, and the balance of power flipped in an instant, with a single phone call, in barely 60 seconds, and now they were about to pay for everything they had done. Thomas Whittaker walked into the bank lobby with the force of a storm, carrying the weight of an entire system on the brink of collapse. The glass doors behind him had not even closed yet, cold air still rushing in from outside, but no one in the lobby felt it. Every eye locked onto one man, the most powerful figure in Riverside Atlantic Bank, a man whose presence alone was enough to drain the color from faces that had been so arrogant only moments before. Brian Keller stood frozen, his face as white as paper, while Linda Harrington struggled to rise from the chair her knees had just surrendered to. Samuel Briggs stepped back entirely, every instinct in his security-trained body, telling him he had been standing on the wrong side all along. Thomas stopped directly in front of Eleanor Brooks, and the first thing he did was not confront Brian or Linda. He placed a hand over his heart and said with a sincerity rarely seen from someone in his position, "Eleanor, I am sorry." The words pierced through the tightening atmosphere like a blade. An apology from the chief executive officer of the bank, spoken openly in front of staff and customers. The entire lobby froze for 3 full seconds. Elena looked at him, her eyes calm but deep as an ancient well, and nodded slightly. "Thank you for coming." Then Thomas turned. The look he gave Brian was not the look of a superior evaluating a subordinate. It was the look of a man who had just witnessed an error capable of shaking an entire corporation, an entire group of shareholders, and the entire financial sector. Mr. Keller Thomas said, his voice low and steady but sharp as a knife, "I want you to explain what is happening." Brian opened his mouth, but not a single coherent word came out. His lips trembled, his hands clenched as if trying to hold on to a reality already slipping away. "I was just following protocol. The customer showed unusual behavior." Unusual behavior. Thomas cut him off instantly. "Your prejudice is a new protocol now." Linda stepped in, grasping at the last threads of her authority. "Mr. Whittaker, we were simply following anti-fraud policy. The customer's transaction was unusually large, and her behavior was non-compliant." Elena turned to Linda, her eyes sharp as fire. "Non-compliant?" she asked. "I gave my card my identification and requested to speak to a superior." Which part of that was non-compliant? Linda's voice vanished for a split second before she forced herself to continue. "We have to prioritize the safety of the bank." "Safety." Thomas repeated, his voice echoing off the walls. "We are talking about a customer withdrawing her own money." Ethan swung his camera toward Thomas. The live stream shot up to 4,800 viewers. A comment shot across the top of the screen. "The CEO is in the building, game over." "This is wild. Best episode of my life." Thomas did not look at the live stream, but he felt the weight of every eye in the lobby and the eyes watching through thousands of screens. He looked around the room and spoke clearly. "Why are other customers withdrawing money with no questions asked? Why is she the only one being interrogated? Why did you call security? Why did you threaten the police?" Brian stuttered, I thought the account was not hers." Thomas turned to Eleanor, and at that exact moment, a truth silently unfolded that no one in the lobby had imagined. "Eleanor Brooks," he said slowly, letting each syllable fall like a warning bell, "is not just a customer of this bank. He paused, turning to face Brian Linder, and every staff member whose actions had turned a simple morning into a full-blown human rights crisis. "Is a strategic shareholder of Riverside Atlantic Bank." The lobby erupted in shock. A customer dropped his phone. Jenna Porter slapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, as if she had just witnessed a national secret being exposed. Ethan shouted into the live stream, "For 4,800 viewers, I knew it, I called it." Plot twist of the year. Brian's knees buckled, sending him crashing onto the chair behind him. Linda stumbled backward, her eyes wide, staring at the ruins of her career. Samuel blinked repeatedly, disbelief etched into every line on his face. And Thomas continued louder this time. And not just a shareholder. He looked at Elena, who nodded quietly, as if giving him permission to reveal what she had kept hidden for the past 20 minutes. "Is the second largest shareholder of the entire institution after the board. She holds nearly 60% voting power. A shockwave spread through the lobby like an electrical surge. What? Brian gasped, his voice breaking apart. Jenna whispered, gripping the desk. "We treated the bank's own shareholder like a criminal." Linda swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She as Thomas delivered the final blow, each word, like a hammer, striking the coffin of those who had disrespected Elena. "She is the true owner of this bank." A collective gasp tore through the room. Several customers stepped back, as if witnessing the greatest reveal of the year. Ethan nearly screamed into the phone. "I knew it. I knew this. Script! This is legendary!" Brian sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. Linda stood frozen, unable to move. Samuel inhaled deeply and bowed his head lower than he had ever bowed to any superior. Elena remained still amidst the chaos, calm and composed, not triumphant, not vindictive, only carrying a quiet sorrow in her eyes, the sorrow of someone who had seen this societal tragedy far too many times. Thomas turned to her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They will be held accountable," he said. Elena nodded softly. "And I will wait for the official response." Then she turned to Brian. "Mr. Keller," she said with a voice, light as breath, yet heavy as judgment. "Do you still think I do not have $75,000 to withdraw?" Brian could not answer, could not lift his head, could not meet her eyes. And in that moment, as the entire bank witnessed the truth laid bare, Brian Keller's downfall was sealed. But this was only the surface of the storm. What would come next was larger, stronger, harsher, and entirely unavoidable. Elena scanned the room, her gaze passing like a final verdict over those who had underestimated her. Then she spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I will handle this through the proper procedures. Procedures that none of you respected today." And as she took one step forward, everyone in the lobby knew the real storm had only just begun. The moment Thomas Whitaker declared that Elena Brooks was the second largest shareholder of the entire Riverside Atlantic Bank system, the lobby sank into a silence so deep the only sound left was the steady breath of the air conditioner above. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of people who had just watched their own prejudice shatter the silence of those who suddenly realized they had struck a mountain they mistook for a grain of sand. Every gaze shifted toward Elena, but no longer with suspicion or judgment. This time they looked at her with stunned confusion, trying to comprehend how the woman in a simple hoodie held such immense power, and how they had driven themselves to the brink of self-destruction without even knowing it. Elena stood upright, not raising her voice, not gloating, just looking at the people who treated her like a criminal, with eyes filled with disappointment, exhaustion, and the quiet steadiness of someone who had witnessed history repeat itself far too many times. "I came here to withdraw my own money," Elena said, her voice calm, as if reciting a story already written. "But what I received was not service. It was prejudice, disrespect, and baseless accusations." Brian Keller could not lift his head. He stared at the floor shoulder, shaking, uncertain whether it was shame or fear gripping him. Linda Harrington tried to stand tall, but her legs trembled uncontrollably. Samuel Briggs kept his hands behind his back, head bowed, as if awaiting a verdict. Eleanor looked at all three of them and continued. "The most painful part is not that you doubted me. It is that you believed you had the right to doubt me without reason, simply because I did not look like the customer you expected." Ethan Miles moved closer with his phone. His live stream surged past 12,000 viewers. Comments erupted. "She's speaking facts, teach them, no way out for them now. Life lesson right here." But Elena was not speaking for the live stream. She was speaking to the people standing in front of her, the ones who were supposed to serve every customer fairly, but instead used their small power to judge and humiliate. Thomas stepped next to her, a silent acknowledgement that Elena was not just a wronged customer. She was the one leading this moment with a level of integrity even the bank's top leadership respected. Elena Thomas said, "I want to confirm something. Did they actually threaten police action and accuse you of fraud?" Elena turned toward Brian and Linda. "Mr. Keller," she asked, "would you like to repeat what you said to me?" Brian forced his head up, panic flooding his eyes. He opened his mouth, but only fragments spilled out. "I do not know why." "You said I was using dirty money," Elena said for him. "You asked where I got my account information. You accused me of money laundering and identity theft." Each word hit like a weight, and Brian collapsed further into the chair hands covering his face. But Elena was not finished. "And you," Elena said, turning to Linda, "you called my account a suspicious account. You told me I needed 3 weeks to verify my identity. You mocked me when I asked for your names and employee numbers." Linda's face blanched. She stumbled back another step as if the spotlight now burning on her exposed the truth she had hoped to bury under authority. I did not mean," Linda whispered. Elena met her eyes, her voice steady, strong enough to hold the entire lobby in place. "That is the problem. The lines you crossed were not crossed because you meant to harm me. They were crossed because you believed you had the right to judge, the right to suspect, the right to treat someone as lesser simply because they do not dress like your idea of a wealthy customer." Thomas turned back to Elena. "How would you like to proceed?" Elena tightened her grip on her portfolio. First she said, "I want my transaction completed. I want to withdraw $75,000 exactly as I initially requested." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Jenna Porter, process Ms. Brooks's transaction immediately." Jenna jumped, rushing toward the counter, but Eleanor lifted her hand. "Not yet." The lobby fell silent again. "Before I accept the money," Eleanor said, "I want one thing clarified. Does this bank apply the same procedures to all customers?" No answer, or only to customers who look suspicious to you. Still no answer. A silence, thicker than before, settled across the room. Eleanor turned toward the entire lobby. her voice clear, each word slicing through the air. I want everyone here to witness this. I was treated like a criminal, not because I did anything wrong, but because I did not look like someone who would withdraw $75,000. Ethan raised his camera, the live stream exploding with comments. Say it louder. This should be in history books. Protect this woman at all costs. Elena continued, I do not want anyone else to experience this. Not here. Not at any other branch. Not at any bank in this country. Thomas nodded firmly. I will immediately call an emergency meeting with the board. Everyone involved will be held accountable. Elena looked at him, her tone dropping but gaining gravity. I have not even begun requesting accountability, Mr. Whittaker. But I will. Linda swayed, holding on to the counter for balance. Brian hid his face in his hands. Samuel bowed so deeply it looked like he wanted to disappear. But before we get to accountability, Elena said, I want to hear something first. She turned to Brian. Mr. Keller, she said softly, but with the edge of a polished blade. Would you like to apologize for insulting me in front of customers and staff? Brian's voice shook violently. I am sorry. I am truly sorry. I was wrong. Elena nodded slightly, though her eyes did not soften. And you, Mrs. Harrington? Linda's voice cracked. I am sorry, Miss Brooks. I acted improperly. Elena held their gaze for a long moment, a look that forced them to face, not just their mistakes, but the entire system of prejudice they had been feeding. Then she delivered the final line, the one that told everyone the real storm was just forming. I accept your apologies. But apologies do not erase consequences. And I will ensure Riverside Atlantic never lets this happen to anyone ever again. As Jenna shakily began processing the $75,000 withdrawal, Thomas stood beside Elena, as though trying to shield her with his authority from an injustice that had already cut too deep. But the truth was, Elena did not need protection. Because in that moment, everyone in the lobby understood she was not simply a victim of bias. She was the storm preparing to tear that bias down. And this was only the beginning. The moment Jenna Porter began entering the $75,000 withdrawal into the system, her fingers trembled so hard, the keyboard clicked unevenly. But what made the air inside Riverside Atlantic feel ready to explode was not the money. It was the commanding presence of Eleanor Brooks, the woman who only minutes earlier had been treated like a criminal, now standing so firmly that the entire branch seemed unable to steady itself. Thomas Whittaker stood beside her eyes, fixed on Jenna's hands, not to supervise her work, but to ensure Elena would not endure even one more second of humiliation. But Elena was not looking at Jenna. She was looking at Brian and Linda, a gaze that needed no anger, yet made both of them want to stare at the cold stone floor. Brian Keller felt his life collapsing, not slowly, but in an instant, like a bridge, suddenly snapping, because one rotten bolt had finally given way. He opened his mouth several times, but his throat was so dry that nothing emerged but a desperate swallow. Linda Harrington, who only moments earlier carried herself like a powerful regional manager, now stood pressed against the wall as if trying to flee the harsh spotlight, exposing every misstep she had made. Yet Eleanor didn't look at them with triumph. She looked at them the way someone looks at the inevitable products of a system she had spent her whole life trying to reform. When Jenna confirmed the transaction and placed the neatly counted stack of money on the silver tray, Eleanor didn't take it immediately. Instead, she turned toward everyone in the lobby, toward the silent witnesses, to the injustice toward those live streaming from the corners, toward those who watched, but said nothing, as if they had just survived an earthquake and did not yet know which direction to run. "Before I take this money," Elena said, her voice not loud, but carrying so clearly it felt as if the stone walls were amplifying each word. "I want to make one thing clear. Today is not about a withdrawal. It is about how each of you chooses to treat people who do not look like the wealthy customers you imagine." Linda shut her eyes for half a second, as if absorbing a blow she could not dodge. Brian sucked in a breath as if trying to speak, but Eleanor stepped forward first. How many people have had to go through this with no one to defend them? How many have been denied service, humiliated or treated with suspicion simply because they do not fit your expectations? Elena asked, her voice, neither shaking nor breaking the voice of someone who had faced this 100 times, yet refused to let it crush her. Ethan Miles whispered into his phone as the live stream hit 26,000 viewers. "My God, she is lecturing the entire banking industry." Thomas Whitaker remained still, but his hands tightened slightly, as though something inside him had just awakened, something he had overlooked in the system he led. Elena continued, "I didn't come here to get anyone fired. I came here to see what customers are dealing with." She turned slowly, her eyes passing over each face, each person trying to hide their shame or discomfort. "And today," she said, "you showed me everything." The sentence did not need volume. It rocked the entire room. Thomas stepped forward. "Elena, I want to assure you that I will handle this with the highest level of seriousness. This will be reported directly to the board." Elena did not nod. She simply continued, her tone steady like a war drum. "I want an emergency meeting at 2:00 this afternoon." Brian stopped breathing for a second. Linda gripped the edge of the desk. Samuel bowed his head even lower. "We will meet," Thomas said immediately. "I will require every senior leader in this bank to attend." Elena looked straight at Linda. "I want every branch in the entire system to review their customer intake procedures, and I want a detailed report on my desk before the end of the week." Linda opened her mouth as if to ask for more time, but did not dare. "Yes, we will start right away." "Not will start," Elena corrected, softly, sharply. "Start today." A customer nearby clapped once without realizing it, a reflexive reaction to witnessing justice placed squarely on the table. And now everyone in the lobby began to understand. They were witnessing not just the downfall of 3 employees, but the beginning of a shift that might reshape the financial service industry, at least the part Elena Brooks controlled. Elena turned back to Thomas. "Mr. Whitaker, I want assurance that every employee will receive new training on customer treatment. I want an anonymous reporting system for customers to report discrimination. And I want an independent internal oversight program free from branch influence." Thomas nodded quickly, almost urgently. "I will begin immediately. I give you my word." Elena did not smile. She merely nodded, and that lack of a smile carried more weight than any ultimatum. Lastly, Elena said, turning toward the people who had stood by silently, "I hope all of you understand that silence in the face of injustice is also a form of complicity." Several bystanders lowered their heads, cheeks flushing. A few slowly tucked their phones away, as if realizing the live stream was not just recording the incident, but also their silence. Elena turned back for the $75,000. But just as her hand touched it, she spoke one final line that sliced through the room like an invisible blade. "And remember, I am not standing here as a victim. I am standing here as the person who will change how you operate forever. As Eleanor lifted the stack of money, the lights above caught the embossed Brooks Financial Group logo on her portfolio, reflecting like a mark of undeniable authority. And in that moment, all the masks, arrogance, bias, complacency, and unconscious discrimination fell to the cold stone floor of Riverside Atlantic. What remained was the truth, and that truth belonged to Elena Brooks alone. But now it would reshape an entire system, and no one could stop the storm they themselves had summoned. The emergency meeting at 2 o'clock that afternoon was not just an internal gathering, it was a silent tribunal, a courtroom without robes or gavels, where every manager of Riverside Atlantic felt a weight pressing against their chest. When Elena Brooks stepped into the 15th floor conference room of headquarters, a room with glass walls overlooking all of Midtown Atlanta, no one dared look out at the skyline. They looked only inward, confronted by the mistakes they never imagined would be exposed. Thomas Whitaker sat at the head of the table, but every ounce of attention in the room belonged to Elena, the woman who placed her portfolio on the table, as if laying down evidence of an entire system gone wrong. The room fell into a breathless silence as Eleanor began speaking. I want everyone here to understand that what happened this morning is not a personal issue, she said. This is a systemic one. The words made Brian Keller stiffen. He had been required to attend the meeting by Thomas, not to defend himself, but to face the truth and face the consequences. Linda Harrington sat several seats away, hands twisting together, face pale. Samuel Briggs stood near the back, like a soldier summoned before a disciplinary council. Elena lifted a thick folder and placed it on the table, the sound hitting like a hammer. Here, she said, is a compilation of more than 247 customer reports over the past 6 months regarding discriminatory behavior across Riverside Atlantic branches. The room jolted. Elena was not just a shareholder. She had been watching them for a long time, and they had never prepared for this. And today, Elena continued. I have live evidence of how your staff treats a customer of color when they believe that customer has no power. Brian lowered his head further. Linda wiped sweat from her forehead, despite the strong air conditioning. Thomas gave a subtle nod, acknowledging that the entire system had run out of excuses. Elena turned her gaze to Brian. Mr. Keller, tell me something. If this morning it had not been me, but an ordinary customer, someone without the ability to call the CEO, what would have happened? Brian choked, as if something lodged in his throat. Elena stared directly at him. You would have called the police. You would have let them be arrested. You would have destroyed their life simply because they did not look like someone who could withdraw $75,000. Isn't that true? Brian's voice cracked apart. I didn't mean. Elena cut him off, her voice cold enough to make the entire room flinch. That is exactly the problem. You did not need to mean it, to do it. Linda's hands shook so hard, the water glass in front of her trembled. Elena turned to her. And you, Mrs. Harrington, you are a regional manager. When you walked into that lobby, you did not ask for documentation. You did not ask for context. You did not verify anything. You looked at me wearing a hoodie and decided I was suspicious. Linda's breath came out uneven. I was wrong. I am sorry. An apology does not erase the system you helped uphold, Elena said, her voice sharp as a blade. But at least it shows you recognize the problem. Elena turned to Thomas. I have 3 immediate demands. First, terminate Brian Keller for severe discriminatory conduct that placed the bank at legal risk. Second, suspend and demote Linda Harrington for retraining in personnel management and bias prevention. Third, establish an independent internal audit program to monitor discriminatory behavior across all branches. Thomas did not hesitate. I agree. Brian collapsed deeper into his chair, eyes wide like someone hearing a life sentence. Linda raised a hand to her forehead, while Samuel inhaled deeply, aware he escaped, only because he played the smallest role in the disaster. Elena continued, I also expect a formal reform plan delivered to my office by 5 o'clock today. And if the plan is insufficient, I will proceed with a shareholder vote to restructure the entire senior leadership team. The room fell utterly still. That was not a threat. That was a reality. Eleanor had the authority to do it, and they all knew it. Thomas nodded again. I will personally oversee the creation of that plan and sign off on it. Elena closed her portfolio, stood up, and her final words left the entire room stretched tight like a drum surface. I am not angry today, she said. I do not need to be. The truth is powerful enough to speak on its own. Then she walked out of the room, leaving behind a row of executives, financial managers, and leaders who once believed they held the power, now sitting like helpless defendants before a storm they never imagined would come from a woman in a simple hoodie. But Eleanor didn't need loud authority. She only needed the truth. And the truth was what made an entire corporation tremble that day. When Eleanor Brooks stepped out of the 15th floor conference room, her footsteps were not loud yet. To those who had just sat in that room, every step echoed like a funeral bell, tolling for the complacency they had built their careers upon. The hallway stretched long under the cool glow of fluorescent lights, reflecting off the navy carpet. But Eleanor didn't look around. She looked straight ahead toward the slightly open glass door leading to the balcony, where the late afternoon breeze drifted in, carrying the chill of the day sliding toward dusk. Thomas Whitaker walked beside her without saying a word, moving like a soldier escorting a commander. Though everyone in the building knew exactly who held the greatest authority in that moment, the entire Riverside Atlantic headquarters felt as if it were holding its breath. Rumors had already spread faster than any internal memo ever could. The woman accused of fraud that morning was the shareholder controlling nearly 60% of the voting power. The same woman who had forced an emergency meeting, the same woman who had demanded a full restructuring of the system before the day ended, and no one dared object. As Eleanor walked through the open workspace, employees who had been typing immediately rose and lifted their heads to look at her. Some eyes showed respect, some guilt, some fear, but none showed contempt anymore. A young employee beside the photocopier bowed his head, even though Elena had never met him. An older employee placed a hand over his chest, as if silently offering an apology. Elena simply nodded. She did not need late apologies, but she could see them for what they were, the first signs of a shifting awareness. And awareness she knew was always the beginning of systemic change. When the elevator opened and carried Elena to the lobby, Ethan Miles was still there, staring at her, with the stunned expression of someone looking at a living legend. His live stream had ended, but he still held his phone as though it had just captured history. Ms. Brooks Ethan began, but Eleanor raised her hand, gently stopping him. You do not have to say anything. Thank you for recording it. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. If it weren't for you, Elena continued, the truth would not have been seen so clearly. Ethan's eyes widened, as if he had just been awarded an invisible medal. I just did what I believed was right, he stammered. Elena offered him a small smile. That is enough. Sometimes one person doing the right thing is enough to change the game. When Elena stepped out of the headquarters, the Atlanta afternoon sun was dipping low, casting gold and red light across the street ahead. She paused for a brief second, taking a deep breath, allowing herself one rare moment to feel the exhaustion she had concealed all day. But not for long. There was still much work to do. Up on the 15th floor, the meeting continued without her senior managers debating, drafting, rewriting, signing, worrying, racing against the clock to complete the plan that had to reach Eleanor's office by 5 o'clock. At the Midtown branch, Brian Keller had already been escorted out, his ID badge, confiscated, his employee files locked. Linda Harrington sat in Human Resources, writing a statement so long her hand shook with fatigue. Samuel Briggs was reorganizing the entire security protocol, eliminating every step that could be misused for discriminatory purposes. And Elena, she stepped into her car, closing the door with the quiet finality of someone putting a period at the end of a harsh chapter in an entire organization's story. But this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new era she was forcing Riverside Atlantic to enter. As the car pulled into traffic, her phone buzzed with new messages. The plan is being finalized. We will send it on time. Another message followed. Midtown branch staff are in an emergency meeting to review new procedures. And another, the board of directors requests a meeting with you tomorrow morning. Elena leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes for 2 brief seconds. After all the noise, outrage, tension, and the quiet ache beneath it all, she understood something important. What happened that morning was not merely a moment where she reclaimed justice for herself. It was the first spark of a transformation people like Brian and Linda never imagined would ignite so fiercely. The bank had trembled, the system had cracked, and now they would have to rebuild the right way. As the car merged into the flow of evening traffic, Eleanor opened her eyes and looked ahead towards the setting sun. She whispered quietly enough that no one else could hear. Today I did not win, because I had power. I won, because they were wrong. Then she allowed herself a gentle smile, not for victory, but for hope. Because after today, no customer who walked into Riverside Atlantic would ever be dismissed because of how they looked again. And that was the most meaningful victory Elena Brooks could ever deliver. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and human behavior, Elena Brooks's story reveals an undeniable truth. The greatest form of power does not come from titles or wealth, but from the ability to stand firm in the face of prejudice and force a system to confront itself. A calm, prepared individual who dares to challenge injustice can transform not just a branch, not just a corporation, but the way an entire industry operates. Elena didn't win through anger, she won through truth, through evidence, and through unwavering persistence, the very qualities that create lasting change. If this story resonated with you, like the video to spread the message of fairness and subscribe so you do not miss powerful journeys that expose the truth, just like this one. And comment with the phrase, "Stand strong," to remind one another that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to step back to change everything.